Thanks for joining us on the Cultured Meat and Future Food podcast. I'm really excited to be here with Dr. Dwayne Holmes. Dwayne, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to first jump into when we last met or when we last interacted. I think the last time we ran into each other was at ISCCM in Maastricht. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And we'll get back into that and like the conference series and what you're doing, because you're based actually in the Netherlands.
That's correct. I'm in Haarlem, so it's just outside of Amsterdam.
Okay, great. And are you from the Netherlands?
No, I'm originally from Chicago, but I came to the Netherlands to study and then stayed.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm going to jump right into it and say, tell us a little bit about your background. What did you study? What was your research focus on? And how did you get into the field of cultured meat?
Yes. All right. So I came to the Netherlands to study molecular and stem cell biology, and that's what I did. MSc and then also PhD. And it transferred from molecular to stem cell biology, but it stayed within the focus of neuroscience. So it was making models, disease models for neurological diseases. I'll say childhood neurological diseases. But during that time, once you learn about stem cells, right, you can control the fate of cells, right, from one identity to another, including if you get into advanced stem cell work, induced pluripotency, stuff like this, you can really change things, right? Then it became obvious to me there are a lot of applications beyond even regenerative medicine. This is basically what it was, regenerative medicine. One of those being food, right? You can create muscles, right? You can create fat. That's a possible application. So I was always curious about this, even when I was in my graduate studies, although the field was still very early. And I'm like, okay, this is going to take a while. Then it was actually during my PhD work that there was the first tasting of cultured meat burger. This was by Mark Post in England. Well, I mean, he's from Maastricht, but it was held in England. And I was like, oh, wow, this is going a little bit faster than I expected. I really thought it was going to take a lot longer to take off. And so when I graduated with my PhD, I had a lot of options, but I was like, maybe I should start my own company in cultured meat. I actually thought, okay, this is an option. But in the Netherlands, there were already two startups. So there's Meatable and there was Mosa Meat. And I was like, should I actually try to, raise money to become another competitor in this small field or this small region? Or
did you want to stay in the Netherlands?
I did want to stay in the Netherlands. I want to stay in Europe, but Netherlands, since I was already in Netherlands, that would be easier. And not to mention, Netherlands is nice for biotechnology. So as I would stay here if I was going to do that. But I was like, maybe I should join forces instead because these are still startups and I'd have something to offer. But there's a little bit longer tale of how I went through this, but where I ended up was Mosa Meat. And I was head of quality assurance and regulatory work. I went in with the appeal of writing the first dossier for a cultured meat product, right? But there's a lot more to it in it because, again, it's quality assurance as well as regulatory, and you're trying to set up these safety analytics and things like this. So that's where I started in the field. And then while I was there, I actually became involved with New Harvest because they were doing their workshops with industry on safety of cultured meat. And we were one of the ones that were involved. In fact, I ended up as a co-author on the paper that came out of that. So I was getting along very well with New Harvest, even while I was at Mosa Meat. And I also saw issues while I was in the field, or in the industry, I should say, that were concerning to me. And I was seeing some things that were slowing up progress, to my mind. And so at some point, I decided to leave Mosa Meat. And I actually went into consulting for a very brief amount of time, but it didn't take long for New Harvest, specifically Isha, the executive director, to contact me because we had a good relationship. And she knew that, okay, I was starting in consulting, but I still had my eye on maybe starting my own company. I was like, okay, maybe I could do this. And she said, so she knew that I had these issues, right? These things that I was seeing that were problematic in the field. I could become, I could start my own business and try to address those issues while being a competitor with everybody else. Or, right, so entrepreneur trying to create a product while trying to solve these field wide issues, right? Or I could be an intrapreneur, work in the nonprofit space, and just really address those issues, right? Those field wide issues. And at New Harvest, it's cellular agriculture. So it wasn't just cultured meat, it's also precision fermentation. So I got to really work on field wide issues that had become a concern to me, and I got to broaden the technologies that I could address. So that was definitely a winning pitch, and I moved to New Harvest. And in fact, I helped them set up their entity in the Netherlands. So I don't know how much was covered before when you were talking to her, but there's the U.S. entity and the Canadian one, and they didn't have one in Europe. So it was also a good timing where I had left MOSA and I was in this stage of what can I do, and they wanted to have a foot in Europe. And it's okay, create an entity within Netherlands. So I helped them set it up, and now I'm director of New Harvest Netherlands.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. And we'll dive into a little bit more details there. But I'm really curious, if you were to start a company in the field, what kind of company? What would you be focusing on? Theoretically,
so there's a couple ways to address this because there's the technological. What are the technologies that I'd want to use versus what are like the products I'd want to try and create, or what is the market that I would want to serve? I'll start with the technology. The work that I was doing in regenerative medicine focused on pluripotent stem cells. So it's embryonic stem cells and what are called induced pluripotent stem cells. That's basically you take whatever cell in the body you can get and you can turn it back into an embryonic stem cell like state. So it's basically like an embryonic stem cell. And from there, it has indefinite proliferation, growth, and can form any cell in the body, right? So you really have this nice, they're lines, right? Which can create whatever you want and have these, again, the indefinite proliferation, indefinite growth makes them really nice compared to, I'll give an example of mosa meat. So they use what are called primary cells. So it's just the cell that is taken from an animal, and that is going to have limited proliferation capacity. There's what's called the Hayflick limit. There's only a certain number of doublings before that ends, and it will also have, because it'll at best you'll have an adult stem cell. It'll have a certain range of cells it can create compared to a more pluripotent stem cell. So as a technology, if I was going into this, that's one thing I would do is use either ESCs, embryonic stem cells, or iPSCs. And I should say, this is the iPSCs are the technology that Meatable was using. And so they're the other one that's in the Netherlands. And so that was a direction which I would understand and I would tend to go to. But then there's the question of how do you do this? Does it involve gene editing or gene modification, right? I don't want to do the whole splitting hairs of whether it's gene editing or gene modification, but some do. But if you do gene editing or gene modification, it can end up in a different regulatory pathway than if you're just doing something that is not, right? So that's why in Europe, I should say, this is for Europe, Mosa Meat's technology would end up in the novel food category, and Meatable, the way they do things, would end up in a GM unless there's this parsing of gene. Not even in there, so it'll still end up in the GM, and which is a harder pathway, right? I actually prefer if you can do this without gene editing or gene modification. However, and so that would be my technology-wise, I'd want ESCs or iPSCs, and then would I want to adjust them for efficiency? The argument's there. If you really want to have efficiency quickly, right, developing a technology quickly, there's an argument for it. It's just, it ends up being harder on the regulatory pathway. You would end up having to go to places like Singapore or places like the US or anywhere where it's more tolerant towards genetic modification. But anyways, so these are the technologies that I would be around. I would also tend to, so now moving into what would I want to make, right? I would tend to work on, I would want to work on, I'm going to say, I don't want to just say chicken, but avian, but like chicken, or porcine, pork. And this is, there's two reasons. One is the kind of animal ethics. So it's more than, if you want to do, let's say, environmental concern, if that's your major concern, then it's clear that cow is one of the biggest that you can, because they're the ones that have the biggest impact, negative impacts, right? But if you talk about health and you talk about just animal welfare, because the number of animals that end up getting killed or the conditions that they're in, then there's an argument for pigs, porcine, or avian. And so I would tend to do those, and there's additional advantages to both. For avian, they've got eggs, right? So you can get ESCs very easily from eggs. And in fact, there's even technologies where you can take the cells out and it doesn't even affect the development of the chick inside. You can still end up with a chick, which is quite interesting. But then for, let's say, for pigs or any mammalian, you can actually take things from like umbilical cord rather than from an animal living, like you don't have to do a biopsy that hurts them. You can just take it from discarded tissue. Again, umbilical cord is good. And because I come from regenerative medicine, porcine, if you're working on developing techniques, any sort of stem cell techniques, it might have a greater applicability back to human, right? So you could use them as a model. So that's the other thing I would want to be doing as I'm, let's say, the timeline for creating food products or the technologies for food products. It's going to be a while, right? So if you can discover other things that are applicable to medicine, human medicine, right? Or even veterinary medicine, but especially human medicine, you've got something else that you can make some money from. So I was thinking of, okay, there's an animal ethics and health angle, as well as the ability to, especially if you do porcine, to help move back and apply this also to a regenerative medicine. So this is the kind of concepts that I had.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, no, I love it. And it's actually very well thought out. And I think it also shows that you're very familiar with all the kind of different aspects and nuances, which it makes it even more important as you touch anything regulatory. And I was going to say, if you were from Chicago, I thought you were going to try to make cultured Italian beef or something like that. But no, that's really interesting. How much, this is just a question I have out of curiosity, how much of this unlimited proliferation is in theory versus can be done for those types of cells?
Yeah, this is why I don't want to, I was saying indefinite, right? I've used unlimited before, and I know a lot of people use unlimited. It's not really unlimited in practice. Because how do you do that? How do you say unlimited? You have not lived forever, so you don't know how long it'll go. What it is, the limits are high, extremely high, and so for practical purposes, you can treat them as indefinite. You're going to have them for a long time. Now, of course, as these go on, if you're continuing with the same cells and you keep going, they will accumulate mutations, and eventually problems will happen. But what is good is even at early stages, you can still, because you can have a lot of material that you've created, you can make clones, right? And it just allows you a greater mass of material. And again, it's for practical purposes. You could treat it as indefinite. In reality, you're going to want to continue making material or cell lines, right? And having them as backups. As even you could even have infections or something that happens, right? Or contamination, right? Which it's okay. Now you're going to need things. So it's not once you get the one cell line, that's it. You're set forever. No, but it is much easier to work with, and I would argue preferable than primary cells. And in fact, I want one other thing with cell lines, right? And it doesn't just have to be ESCs or iPSCs. Another popular thing are immortalized lines. These also have indefinite proliferation, but they can have more limited differentiation, right? So the advantage to pluripotent is, first of all, they're natural, or at least ESCs are completely natural. proliferative and differentiation capacity did not require a mutation. Immortalized means there is a mutation. You either put it in there or it developed over time, and now it has this indefinite capability, but it does have a more limited range of what it can become normally. And I think that did I get to the question?
No, yeah, no, that was amazing. Yeah. So I always want to, oh
wait,
yeah,
there
go
was
ahead.
one more thing I want to say about the lines. So because of their ability to go for a while, they have the advantage of, you can test them, you can analyze what their performance is, and it stays that way. So with primary cells, every time you get another biopsy, you get more material, you're going to have to do another performance analysis, right? Or you'll find out what the performance analysis as you do your actual experiments or do your growing your material for food or whatever. They will have a different performance every batch. Cell lines should be consistent constantly. So you'll still want to do routine testing every once in a while, but that's different than every time, which costs money and time. So that was another important thing to say about lines versus primary.
No, yeah, no, that's great. And I feel like I've always wanted to ask that question, but didn't have the right opportunity. So you really not only gave me the right opportunity to ask that question, but very beautifully explained it to me and the audience. So thank you for that. And yeah, so now I can also wrap my head around it a lot better in terms of, okay, what does this really mean in that direction? Okay, awesome. I want to jump back to New Harvest. And first, I want to say that your Dutch must be pretty good. Is that right?
It's good enough.
It's good. Okay.
Well, I will be honest, it's not as good as it should be for as long as I've been here, but
Yeah, okay.
it's serviceable. It's serviceable. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. A very difficult language to learn. But so tell us when the New Harvest Europe was, what year was it established?
Okay, so I left most of Meat in 2000, summer of 2021, and well, so basically within that year. So there's a difference between where you're setting it up and then you get everything finalized. So I think everything was finalized probably by 2022, I'd want to say. But I would say we were already working towards it and working as if it was there even in 2021. But to have everything done, in fact, I would say even some of the administrative stuff just got completed recently. It takes a while to get through some of the bureaucracy. I get in the weeds if I discussed all the things that were happening. There's also issues at the time where the government was changing rules and banks started changing rules. So how you could get bank accounts for nonprofits became an issue. I won't, but so that's what made things go a lot longer than they should have. So you could say as of 2021, we were functioning as if there was there, but as an entity that's officially on paper and you can do things with, it would be 2022.
Okay, great. Very cool. And so this entity essentially acts as the New Harvest arm for all of Europe, not just the Netherlands. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep. That's
okay.
correct.
Okay, great. And we've seen a lot of great expansion and kind of information projects initiatives come from New Harvest when we just think about New Harvest, which includes New Harvest in the US, New Harvest in Canada. But what are some of the topics that you're focusing on in the Netherlands, in Europe?
Yes. So one of the issues that I am really concerned with is trying to identify and encourage pre-competitive research. This is one of the things and this is because one of the issues that I was seeing in the field was that because there was so much private investment, basically everything's going on in silos, right? So you have lots of companies, research goes on behind closed doors, and so it's not an efficient process, right? It's not going as fast as it could, which has led to problems, even for these companies, because they're, of course, not meeting the expectations of their investors, right? You go faster when when you actually are sharing information. It's a normal scientific process. And in many fields, there is pre-competitive research, pre-competitive collaboration. between developers that might, under normal circumstances, be competitors and they don't want to share anything. Yeah, but they really need to raise the TRL level up to a point where it makes sense that they then start worrying about IP. So that's one of the concerns that I've had and I've been working on. And there's, okay, so you said separate from what we just generally do in the harvest. That's one of the things that I especially focus on. But one of the things I think that where New Harvest started doing something a little bit different. Maybe this, I don't know if this is of interest to people, but we're primarily philanthropic donations. But we decided to try for government funding, actually funding into projects. And this is an experiment that New Harvest Netherlands, all of them are doing this. But this is something that really was successful pretty quickly with this. We hit some smaller grants that came about. They weren't necessarily government funded, but they were on small projects. But then, say earlier this year, those are technically last year, but late last year, we got a grant for the EU Horizon project called Feasts. So it's FEASTS, Fostering European Cellular Agriculture for Sustainable Transition Solutions. And the call for this, it was to understand the socioeconomic dimensions of cultured meat. How would this actually impact, let's say, EU? It can stand for anywhere, but especially for in EU, right? And this is different than just understanding the technology. It's understanding the social dimensions. And this is something that of the other New Harvest entities are also concerned with, but it's something that now we've got some funding on a specific project to look at that within Europe. And so I would say these are
Okay.
if I was good at, those are the two major things that I'm working on.
Two focus areas, yeah.
Yep.
And so I want to talk more about Feasts and EU Horizon, but I want to also track back because I was thinking about it more about the term you used, pre-competitive. As private investment goes to these different companies, a lot of them might be doing the same type of research that eventually
Exactly.
might or might not get published. Tell us a little bit more about the long-term implications of that. And maybe if you have any examples of other markets where it has pros and cons, if any. And this is just a brainstorm. If nothing comes to mind, that's fine. I'm just thinking about what are
Right.
the implications of that? Are there any comparisons we can make?
So let's start with short term, still over a decade. But the short term is this inefficient. It creates an inefficiency. It creates a perverse incentive, in fact, to keep everything behind closed doors, right? And there's other things because you'd mentioned publications. That's a separate topic, but just sharing information, not necessarily in publications. When you're wanting to be behind closed doors, as you said, you can duplicate work, and it's not only duplicating success, you could be duplicating failures, right? It's a heavy cost for time, effort, money to do this duplication. Then, so that's in the short term, but again, this can affect out to decades. The other thing is this, and this is what I consider more long term. There's especially where there's a high IP concern, right? You have lots of things that can create patents that can actually block other companies or other developers from even starting, right? I forget what it was, the anti-commons or something like this. But the concept is you create this area where people don't want to go because there's so many potential patents in there, and you've actually cut off excitement, right, and investment into an area. Then I want to. There's also another thing, and so you'll see that there are concerns of, from people that are really anti cultured meat, right? Is this is just going to allow for a corporate takeover of our food, right? Corporate monopolization of our food. Yes, I'm not saying it will. I'm saying it with IP, heavy IP, especially patents, right, and stuff like this. What you can end up with is what I call a pharma model for food, right? Which is exactly where you don't want to go with this, and you don't have to. It's just if everybody is quickly trying to take over the market with their patents and creating it where they are the only ones that have the ability to make food products with this, okay, they will be controlling that space. It allows for monopolies or oligopolies, and that I don't think that's useful for anybody. So So there's the short term, but then there's these long, mid, and then long term issues, which I think are just not useful. Although one could, to get to pre-competitive research or collaboration, that doesn't, you could have that and still end up with the mid and long term problems as the patents eventually come in. That is its own issue, but it still can start early if that's where you're all doing this from the beginning this way and you stay trapped in that mindset. That's what it's going to reinforce, right? Because no one wants to be the
I
guy
mean,
that.
especially,
Oh, good.
I was just going to say, especially when it comes to the food system, right?
Yes.
Your food system is something that if we can develop good technologies when it comes to food, it benefits the entire world, everybody.
Yes. And what's more important for this field in specific is what is the promise? All the excitement, right, is about what it can achieve, right? Especially environmental goals, right? And health. We'll leave out the animal first, but the environment and health, right? That's going to require a lot of adoption across the world, right? It can't just be it just can't be in Europe, right? It can't just be in the U.S., right? It really, you need it everywhere, and that means okay, you can't go in and have these very high price things or very exclusive things. And this is where I talk about a pharma model. Look at what happened with COVID, right? And what was the rollout for the vaccines? A pharma model, right? That was not good in third world countries, right? I don't want to third world, but in areas where they don't have these sorts of protections, right? Or they can't get around those IP protections, there was not a good rollout. And you can see the same thing for food. And that's the point, is if you cannot get this adopted extensively, then there goes your environmental and your health. They will not have the impact, which are what the proponents are arguing for. I hope that was
Yeah,
clear.
no, yeah, no, definitely. And I think when you're looking at something that benefits the world, using COVID as an example, I think is also important, because there were areas where it was either too expensive or much more limited supply, or just simply not the first priority. And I think that's not ideal.
You had some owners of, I was going to say, you had some owners of patents going, we're not going to, or we're not going to allow you to do the generics, right? You have to do this, and that area is not going to do it. Okay, fine. Then this food, that was bad enough in pharma. To have it happen in food as well, that's nothing you do not want to duplicate.
Yeah.
And from this, I want to talk about one other issue which is important to me. It is within feasts. It falls within the socioeconomic thing, which I think isn't discussed enough, I say discussed. I don't think people are as concerned as they should be, which is, it's not just the development of the technology, but it's also the supply chains, which are going to be required to have this actually be viable, right? Let's use the stereotypical models of these giant steel bioreactors, right? I don't know if that's going to be a thing, but let's say that's what it is. Okay, are you going to have enough steel for that? Are you going to have enough energy for this? Are you going to have enough renewable energy? Because even from the TEAs, LCAs that have been out, right, it shows that this really has to be coupled with renewable energy, right? Are you going to have that in place? Are you going to have the materials, the raw materials and the specialized materials that you'll need to create your food at scale, at these very large scales, right? And the thing is, this is based on medical technology. You will be pulling from a lot of the resources that pharma or medical, let's say, industry, right? Let's say medical industry is already pulling from. So you now create a tension between your food and your medicine, right? And let's say something like COVID hits again, and suddenly you saw a bunch of resources had to go to it. So it created tension across other medicines. Now you might actually have that with your food, right? So there has to be an understanding of the supply chains and how they will interact with other, right, things, not just food. They affect food as well, but how it'll affect other things like medicine, right? You've got to understand. Again, that's where I say, I don't, yeah. Not only is there not enough discussion, there's not enough concern. We really need to be thinking ahead for that.
Yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive for the podcast to say this, but it makes raising cattle sound pretty easy in comparison. And we don't want easy. We want something that is the best solution. Yeah.
Right.
But you're
Well,
right. And yeah. No,
go ahead.
I'm just thinking about the pharma model, and all resources, all industries were hit in terms of COVID, but having such a close connection to bioreactors, capacity, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to look at. And maybe on the reverse side, I shouldn't say makes raising cattle look easy. I should say raising crops and vegetables and going vegan makes that seem like a very easy choice, which it is, right? Yeah, go ahead.
One other point. You go ahead. I was just going to go a little bit more into the supply stuff, but that's fine. That's fine.
If it pops back, we can
Okay.
jump into it. But I want to learn more about EU Horizon. Maybe you could give us a very short intro into what that is. And then in terms of feasts, who else is involved? What is the specific area that maybe New Harvest is looking at now that has been publicly announced? Can you tell us a little bit more about those two things?
I'll be very general about the EU Horizon because I'll specifically say this is our EU Horizon Farm to Fork project, and basically this is funding into areas, as the name suggests, farm to fork, right? So it's in the agricultural system towards food, right? And it was just, in this case, they were looking at new technologies, novel foods, and this specific one. They have other grants on other areas as well, including, say, for plant-based, insects, right? Things like that. You got to. This was specifically on cultured meat. I think I want to keep it at that, just because if you look at EU Horizon and stuff, there's more that goes in there. As far as Feast itself, in fact, what I will do is I will plug our website because that's where everybody can get a really good overview.
And we'll put that link in the show notes. And it's a very comprehensive website, actually. If you're listening, check it out.
Right. So it involves a lot of partners. We've got 35 partners from, I think it's 16 countries, and most of them are, I think basically all are within EU. We also have a partner in Japan, although they're an associate partner. The idea was to get a very comprehensive look at, so not just a few nations. We really wanted to have it across many different nations within the EU and across many different sectors, right? So we have industry partners, so Gourmet, Cultivate, Vital Meat, they're within it. We also have I should actually plug first, the project coordinator. So I'm executive director of Feasts, but the person who's really in charge is Professor Federico Ferreira. He's from the professor from the University of Lisbon, and he's the head of the project. And so that is an academic thing, and we've got Wageningen University from Netherlands, University of Bologna. We also have companies like, they're nonprofits, some are also partial companies, like Respect Farms and S2 Aqua. And I want to take a moment to discuss those, because that's one of the more unique elements within this, and focuses on the call, right? The main call, which is the socioeconomic impacts. And so they're doing the outreach to farmers and aqua farmers. So the idea is to actually get feedback from people that are in the current ecosystem, or for agricultural system, right? Who are the current value chain players, right? What are they making of this? And it's not just not to convince them to this, but to really understand what are their questions, right? And can this actually, or if and how this can fit with what they are currently doing, right? Are certain things going to be required, right? You can also get into, this is where I was going to talk about a little bit more about supply chain stuff, but maybe it'll fit here, are we looking at a centralized implementation of cultured meat or decentralized, right? Because that will make a difference, right? And in a more decentralized, you can have things that may even be on farms, right? Actually on the farms or near the farms, right? Certainly in more local production. And then there's a question, can that also service local cuisine compared to more centralized where it's going to be mass, this is the product you're getting. I wanted to focus on those two, especially because that is one of the key things, especially right now where there's such heated opinions about cultured meat and reactions. You've seen in Italy these moves to ban cultured meat. It's also true in other countries, and certainly looking for greater regulation. So I think that's really key, and it ties into work that's also been done in the UK. They recently had a publication based on outreach engagement with farmers in the UK. So we're hoping to build this kind of understanding of what the current agricultural system is, right? How cultured meat might fit into it, right? And what are the views of the people that are in the current value chain? And this actually leads to a natural progression to a University of Lund, where they are developing a tool. It's going to be an interactive visual tool, which gives you a very holistic picture of the agricultural system as it stands and how cultured meat would fit into it, right? So you can actually play with, okay, are you using this? Are people, what kind of demands would the people have that would affect this versus this, right? And how they all interact with, the pieces interact with each other. And that's going to be very useful for, I would say, just normal citizens, consumers, to understand how this would fit in, but especially policymakers. They can look at this and go, okay, so if you adjust this sort of thing, these are the kind of effects you might see. And we get a better picture than just simply, cultured meat is a panacea for everything, right? If it gets invented. That is not the way to look at this. You have to understand how it fits into the current agricultural system. I think that's...
And I see there's some traditional meat companies or food producers of traditional agriculture as well. For example, Ruggenwalder Mühle is huge in all over Europe, I think. And so they're also interested and involved.
Yes, so they're interesting. Ruggenwalder Mühle. Maybe I got it pronounced right. They are hard to pronounce, but it's a German company that were really on the cutting edge. I mean, they're notable because they went into plant-based, right? And we're just like, they'll offer plant-based versions of our products. And it's going, right? It's gone very well for them. And so they're like, maybe cultured meat is also a technology that could fit into this. And is like, great, because since they have this enterprising spirit and curiosity, we've brought them in. And you could say they are an example of how things could go, right? You were someone in the current food value chain, but specifically animal, right, decided to move a little bit away from that. And it was a success, right? Okay. And they were able to keep customers as well as keep their own business. And you can see how that would work. So I thought they were really valuable to have on board.
Yeah, and they're plant-based products, like their deli cuts, cold cuts that are completely vegan. They're great. I should say they're way better than anything else I could find in the US. So that's very cool. And actually, we were touring this company called Holak. They make meat cutting machines, essentially. And they have an entire area dedicated to plant-based. So I feel, to me, it seems like some of these traditional manufacturers, supply chain kind of partners in Europe are a lot more open to plant-based alternative proteins, maybe cultured meat, than other parts of the world in the US. Do you have any kind of thoughts on Europe as it looks at plant-based versus other parts of the world? Do you think it's more or less?
So I'll admit a little bit of ignorance on this, just because in New Harvest we concentrate on precision fermentation and cultured meat, and not so much on plant-based, the larger thing.
Well, I guess even cultured meat, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Broad picture.
Yeah. I was caveating that I can't give an informed thing on plant-based, but I still have, what do I see, right, or what I'm experiencing, and I think, and I want to say it's a little bit more regional. I don't want to talk about EU as a whole because I think there's regional differences, right? And I'm in a country where it's much more open, right? You could say a lot more excitement about this, although there's even regions within the Netherlands which would rather not have this, right? Or at least be more skeptical about it. And that would be true in France too, right? Especially where you have a lot of the people that are working in the traditional food value chain, right? This looks like it might shake things up. There'd be a bigger concern. But I would say I tend to see people that are more excited, more open about it, and even within the groups that are supposed to be more resistant or a little bit more skeptical, I still see a general willingness to talk, right? And understand, right? Especially if you're in food production, right? Anywhere in this, you're a businessman, right? You're trying to see how, is it something that will work for you or not? Again, this is right. Ruben Haldermuller, right, did this. And so I think even where there's skepticism or some resistance, there's still an openness to discussion, which I've been happy with. So, and I assume that this, or let's say, I shouldn't assume, but I'm hoping that with feasts, because we are actively trying to engage in this kind of outreach, right? That you're just going to have more doors open. And as long as you're not just pushing a marketing message, right? Oh, this is great. And you should just accept it, right? As long as you're not doing that, you're going to have an interesting conversation and you will find out about stuff. I found, so I was on some of the outreach to farmers for the UK project. It was fascinating to go to the farms and understand what they were facing, right? And then going, oh yeah, okay, so now cultured meat is going to have to somehow fit in into the same thing and deal with some of those same issues. Okay, yeah, this is something that I didn't think about even as a person in technology. Yeah, but there's still a reality, a functioning reality of how they do business that you will have to fit in. Yeah, so I think it's the short answer to your question was I do see an openness. Maybe it's self-selecting. Who's going to talk to me? A little bit of self-selecting, but there seems to be a genuine positivity towards discussion, which is what I like. And then it can work out because a person can still come away and go, it's not going to be for me, but I'd like to see it out there, right? I'd like it available for others, especially in vegan communities. They may go, okay, I will not eat cultured meat, but I would like to see it out there for the people that are carnivores, right? So that's
and there needs to be a starting point, anyways, right? And
yes,
so it's good that there is one. Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. It actually makes me think of something Josh Bulk from Eat Just said. He on the podcast, he was pretty much saying that when these executives of meat companies, let's say egg laying hens or whatever egg company goes to and have a board meeting, they're not like sitting there thinking, how many more chickens can we kill? They're thinking about a business and they're thinking what makes the most sense to create sustainable foods, proteins, while still increasing profit because it is also a business. And so I think, yeah, there are many different ways and different avenues to have a successful food business. And so this is a good way to start the conversation through you and what you're doing at New Harvest or Feasts and just the program in general.
That this will also be generating a little bit more excitement or interest, let's say, from governments. It can be national, so the individual nations within EU as well as at the EU level, to invest in open research, right? Because again, right now it's heavy with the private investment, so it's a lot of closed research. I'm trying to open those doors up. See, part of the Feast project is to see where we can get pre-competitive research and sharing of data. Maybe have a platform that allows for sharing that is sensitive to the IP concerns. But then it would be great to just have straight out open access, right? Research and shared facilities for like upscaling. This is some of the stuff. So in Netherlands, there's the CELAG Netherlands. They received money from the Dutch government. It's part of the National Growth Funds. And it is going into education, research, and the last part still has to be dealt out because there was a little issue with the upscaling facility. But hopefully there will soon be an announcement for upscaling facility, a pilot facility that many different organizations can share and work on some early stage upscaling efforts, which is crucial because this is very expensive stuff.
That leads me to my next question. How can the listeners help with the cause, whether they're in the EU or outside? How can they support your work? How can listeners support New Harvest's work in general?
All right. So I suppose I should always say, we still do take philanthropic donations. Just financially, that's one angle. But I would say, if a person is interested in this, and we've been talking about cultured meat, but it includes precision fermentation, any of these biotech-related food production methods, you could look into national level CELAG organizations. Now, I already talked about there's CELAG Netherlands, right? But there are other CELAG groups across Europe, and I would say even across the world. And recently, there's the network of cellular agriculture, so it's NCA. I know that's there. And you could get involved that way. Get with these national level groups, local groups, to understand how that would be relevant within your region, right? as well as this kind of international network of these groups in order to share this information across the world. You could say it's really an international effort. But beyond that, I would say if you follow the information that is coming out from whatever source, it could be New Harvest, it could be GFI, it could be from Feasts, all right, or locally, wherever you're seeing this coming from, try to gather some information for yourself and see what is going on in your community that you can be involved with. And it doesn't have to be part of a CELAG group, but you can see, are there initiatives that are going on in your area that you can be a part of? So there's many different levels at which you can be involved. Again, there's the industry or the private developers, there's nonprofits, there's which includes these national level CELAG orgs, but there's also individual or say, consumer-based or even government initiatives which you might want to react to, especially if you're in a country like Italy. If you can talk to your representatives and say, I would like more information, right? Or I would like to push back on the thing that you're doing. See what's important. This is where it's hard to give a single answer just because it depends on where you are, right? It depends on what your region is, what you have access to. Because, a person that's in Italy or France, they might have a different suggestion than someone in Netherlands, right? On what they might be able to do.
That's a good call to action, especially those in France or Italy. Dwayne, thank you so much. Will I see you at the next Maastricht conference in the Netherlands in November?
So, yes. I believe so.
Okay, yeah. Should be just a short train ride away for you, right?
Exactly. It's where I used to work, right?
That's right. Yeah. Actually, I think last year when we met up, I'm like, oh, I can introduce you to, I might have even said, I could introduce you to Mark or something. And you're like, yeah, I know Mark, Alex. So it's cool to know about the MOSA background. Thank you so much. I usually just wrap up if you have any short key insights or last insights for our listeners today before we officially say goodbye.
I would encourage actually contacting New Harvest, of course, but also go to our website for Feasts, right? And you can see what's there. And there's a way of becoming interactive with the Feasts program. So I should put a plug in for that. Outside of that, I'd just say thank you for having me on your program. It was nice to share this information. And I enjoy talking with people about this subject and what they can do. So people can feel free to write me. I think my address is at the website, but if not, you can also feel free to share that.
Awesome. Cool. Dwayne, thank you so much for being on the show. This is your host, Alex, and we'll see you on the next episode.